I'm going to be talking today about the book of Exodus from the Jerusalem Bible. Now, apologies in advance because this video is probably going to be a bit of a mess. I'm doing this unscripted as I do most of my reviews. So there could be some rambling. I could go off on tangents that I didn't plan on going off on. It's the Bible. There is a lot to talk about in here. Um, I'm, and that maybe brings me to my second point. I'm definitely not going to be able to talk about everything. There are whole sermons that get delivered on different parts of the book of Exodus. In fact, just off the top of my head, I can think of one, or this is not so much a sermon as a discussion. But there's a passage in Exodus when God is fed up with the Israelites and he says, okay, this is it. I'm just going to wipe them out. And Moses, I'm going to make a new nation out of you. And Moses says, well, hold on, God. If you wipe out the Israelites, then the Egyptians are going to think that you brought them out of Egypt specifically just to wipe them out. It's going to make you look bad in front of the Egyptians. And God appears to change his mind as a result of this argument. It's not 100% clear in the text because God doesn't say explicitly, oh, you're right, Moses, I didn't think about that. But it's implied because God does change his mind immediately afterwards. Now, of course, if you're a Christian, this is problematic because on the one hand, there's an all-powerful, omniscient God who knows the past, present, and future and knows everything, and a human being couldn't possibly tell him anything he doesn't know or hasn't thought of. On the other hand, if you're a Christian, you believe that the Bible is literally true in every detail, or at least the conservative Christians do. So here's a little bit of a tricky passage to get around. And I remember when I was younger, I was at church and there was a Bible study after church. It was for adults only. But for some reason I sat in on it. I don't remember why. I guess that there wasn't any childcare at the time or something. I was, first grade or something. So my dad was attending. I was sitting there with them, and there was a bunch of adults discussing this. And they were going through the different ways of interpreting this passage. One passage being, one possible interpretation being that this isn't literally the way it happened, but this is just the way that it's told to us so that we can understand it, and there was maybe something more complex actually going on that got simplified. Another interpretation is that God was going through a sort of script. Of course, God knew what was going to happen, but God was playing along with Moses, or I don't know. But there was a whole, as I remember, the whole discussion over the course of that hour was just on this rather thorny theological problem where it appeared that Moses had argued against God and won. So that gives you a bit of an idea. So I'm just going to talk as much as I can. I don't know how long I'm going to keep this video going. Usually my videos are about 30 minutes, possibly with something like this. I might go longer. I don't think I'd go more than an hour. But the other thing I need to apologize for, or in advance, is there's construction going on in this apartment, or actually in the floor right above. There'll be some drilling, some hammering. I can hear it. I don't know if it will get picked up by the camera or not. Unfortunately, I can't wait until there's a more ideal time to film this video because this is the only free time I have all week. So, or the only time where I can film a video this week. So I'm just gonna do my best. Apologies in advance, and we'll see if anything worthwhile comes out of this. No one is under any obligation to watch this video if it turns out to be a mess. But anyways, Exodus. Okay, let's get started here. Exodus actually comes from the Greek, just like Genesis does, just like I think all of the Pentateuch names come from Greek, I think. Well, no, wait, Numbers is English, isn't it? But Genesis and Exodus come from the Greek. I found that interesting because, it's originally written in Hebrew. Now, I know that in the era of early Christianity, Greek was the prevalent language, and the writers of the New Testament were using the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. So I guess that's why we use the Greek names for the Old Testament. Although, in English, of course, through most of European history or through most of England's history, the Latin Vulgate would have been the dominant translation, right? Not the Greek. I mean, once the fall of the Roman Empire and everything like that, the Catholic Church was using the Vulgate for years. So why do we use the Greek names in English? I don't know. Anyways, the story in Exodus is so familiar that I don't think I need to recap this. It's been done in Hollywood at least 3 times by my count, major Hollywood productions. The Ten Commandments movie, the Steven Spielberg Prince of Egypt movie, and then there was that Christian Bale movie that came out a few years ago, right? I think. Okay. Everybody knows from Sunday school, right? The 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, etc. Just briefly, maybe on the historical accuracy of this. Scholars believe that this never happened. And this is based off of, I guess, the complete lack of archaeological evidence for it, and the complete lack of any collaborating ancient text that would collaborate something like the 10 plagues or anything like that. Also, and more importantly, we know from archaeological evidence that the nation of Israel was founded by a group of people within the nation of Israel coming together within the land of Canaan coming together to form the state of Israel. It was not outside invaders. So the conquest of Canaan, as depicted in the later books, especially Joshua, never happened. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because Joshua is several books off in the distance. But you can see how this relates together, right? There was no conquest of Canaan by an outside invading group. Then there was no exodus from Egypt and a conquest of Canaan. It was a group that came from within Israel. You don't need to take my word for any of this, of course. You can do your own research. But and I'm not a scholar by any means. I'm just an ordinary reader. But everything I've read on this by legitimate scholars seems to agree on this point, and I would read or listened to. So I would count the Yale lectures on the Old Testament by Christine Hayes, the book, the unauthorized version, Truth and Fiction in the Bible by Robin Lane Fox, who's a famous scholar in England. The BBC series Mysteries of the Bible also talked about how the conquest of Canaan couldn't have happened. The book The Bible Tells Me So by Christian evangelist Peter Innes, I believe is his name, Innes, makes as its central point the fact that Christians have to come to grips with the fact that the conquest of Canaan never happened. I think that's my list. Widespread agreement on that is my impression. There are theories, and I think they're minority views. Christian Hayes goes through them in a couple different of her lectures. One, I think it was lecture 5, which is on the book of Exodus. And then, what was it? Lecture 12, which was on the Conquest of Canaan. I'll look those up and link to them down below. So both when talking about Exodus and when talking about the Conquest of Canaan, she talks about some different theories that some historical memory may have been preserved in the book of Exodus. For example, there may have been some group of escaped slaves that joined up with the nation of Israel. So not the majority of the nation of Israel, but some portion of it could have come from escaped slaves. I get the impression that that's a minority view, and that the majority view is that Exodus is just pure myth. But again, I'm not a scholar. I don't know. So that's presumably the historical background, which is that there isn't a historical background to this. The book is associated, the tradition is that the book is ascribed to Moses. Moses is supposed to have written it according to a Jewish and Christian tradition. But Moses was probably a mythical figure. Modern scholarship has the source theory, where this is credited to four sources. The Yahwist source, which is called the J source because Jehovah being the way this is rendered into English, and presumably German because the source theory comes from German. The E source, which is the Elohim source. So there are two different names for God in the Old Testament narrative, or in the Pentateuch. Yahweh, J, and Elohim, E. The way it's often rendered into English translation is Yahweh is translated as Lord, Elohim is translated as God. Although in my Jerusalem Bible, they're just using Yahweh directly. And then the priestly source, which is a later source from which the priestly materials come from. And then the D source, the Deuteronomistic historian, who I guess is the editor, who is putting this all together and making some alterations. According to Christine Hayes in her lectures, the J source is the primary source for this, with some, at least for the narrative sections. Some, I guess, E source is used to supplement it, and then the priestly stuff we'll get to later. You're also probably familiar that the first 5 books of the Bible, we call them the Pentateuch in English, which means the 5 books, but in Jewish tradition they're referred to as the Torah, which means the books of the law. So these 5 books are not purely narrative, they are law, and we get into the law in a heavy-duty way here in the book of Exodus. The book of Genesis was pretty much all narrative. In fact, I've always been confused why the book of Genesis is included in the books of the law. The only thing I can think of is there is the covenant of circumcision with Abraham, and a little bit of stuff like that is in the book of Genesis. So maybe that's why the book of Genesis is part of the book of the law. I don't know, but the next 4 books are going to be heavy on the laws. And in fact, Exodus is half law. So we've got narrative, the 10 plagues, the escape from Egypt, for the first half of that. And then we've got law. And the law is not nearly as interesting as the narrative. It was much more of a slog to read through in terms of reading experiences. But we'll come to that later. So, let's talk about the narrative first. Like I already said, I don't want to go through this in great detail because I think everybody already knows, right? Everybody already knows about the plagues of Egypt and stuff like that. There are, of course, mixed in with here, some little bizarre episodes that don't often get talked about in Sunday school. My favorite one is from Exodus 4, verses 24. So Moses has been called by God to go to Egypt. So he leaves Midian. He's on his way to Egypt. And while he's on his way, it says, On the journey, when Moses had halted for the night, Yahweh came to meet him and tried to kill him. At once Zipporah, that's Moses' wife, taking up a flint, cut off her son's foreskin, and with it she touched the genitals of Moses. "Truly, you are a bridegroom of blood to me," she said. And Yahweh let him live. It was then that she said, "bridegroom of blood," on account of the circumcision. And then the narrative just continues with Moses meeting Aaron. So that's one of my favorite little bizarre passages from the Bible, and it's just like I read it. It's unclear from the text why God is meeting Moses in the middle of the night to try and kill him, because God's the one who sent him to Egypt. So what sense does that make? God says, okay, you need to go to Egypt. This is very important. Moses is going to Egypt, and on the way, God kills him. I mean, he doesn't, but presumably that's his intention. He comes with the intention of killing him. But what about the mission to Egypt? If you go to the commentaries, then the commentary says, okay, he's trying to kill Moses because Moses didn't circumcise his son, and that is obviously the obvious explanation, because then God lets him live after his son is circumcised. So presumably that's why God was trying to kill him in the first place, although it doesn't explicitly say that. You've got to do a little bit of interpretive work, as is true with a lot of the narrative of the Old Testament, which is why it doesn't always make for a smooth reading experience. You're always like, oh, hold on, what did I miss? What's going on here? So it's for that reason, among others, that even though the page count of the book of Exodus is rather slim, the cognitive burden of processing some of this is increased. Okay, and then we go to the 10 plagues. Now, I'm reading this off of the Jerusalem Bible, which occasionally will have interesting footnotes. I wish they had more, because the stuff that they give me often just makes me curious for more. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but I grew up on the NIV version as a youngster. This is my first time reading the Jerusalem Bible and seeing their commentary. But they give a little footnote here. So there's this narrative. You'll remember this from Sunday school. God commands Moses to go and talk to Pharaoh. And Moses said, well, I can't do it. I can't speak in public. And God says, okay, well, take Aaron. Take your brother Aaron, and he will do the speaking. But then once you get into it with the 10 plagues, and with Moses and Aaron going to meet Pharaoh 10 different times, half the time Moses is actually doing the talking. And so this footnote here in the Jerusalem Bible says there are two different sources being conflated here. There's one source where Aaron does all the talking, and then there's one source when Moses is doing all the talking, and that's why we get this seemingly contradiction in the narrative. The NIV version I grew up in would never have put those footnotes in that would explicitly draw your attention to the problems in the text. But here's where I wish there would be even more footnotes, because another odd thing about this, and maybe you'll remember this from Sunday school, there's this thing going on where God is intentionally hardening Pharaoh's heart. So Aaron and Moses will say, let my people go. Pharaoh will say no. God will do a plague. Pharaoh will say, okay, you guys can go. And then God will say, okay, hold on a second. God will say to Moses and Aaron, hold on a second. Don't get ready to go yet. I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And I'm going to make him stubborn and make him so he won't let you go, in order that I can do more plagues and my glory will be increased. And this is, it's a bit odd, because it's creating this idea of God who's just toying with the Egyptians, who's inflicting all this suffering on them, and then there are theological problems with it, obviously. But the other weird thing in the narrative is that God and Moses and Aaron keep scolding Pharaoh, and they say, "Why are you being so hard-hearted? You've brought this all on yourself. You're being such a jerk to us. Just let us go. Why are you like this?" And as you're reading this, you're thinking, well, it's the reason he's like that is because God explicitly said he was making Pharaoh like this. So why in the narrative do we have all these criticisms about what a bad person Pharaoh is for not letting Israel go, when we know that it's God who's making Pharaoh not let Israel go? And that's the kind of thing which makes me suspect, okay, are there two sources being conflated here? And I wish there was more footnotes. I don't know. That would be my guess, is that that was because there are two different sources being conflated. But yeah, the 10 different plagues, and then the Passover. So there's a little bit of it's all been narrative up until here, but then chapter 12 and 13. Mixed in with the narrative about how the Israelites are leaving Egypt, we get some description about the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. I actually looked this up on the internet. It turns out the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, unleavened, right? Feast of Unleavened Bread are actually two separate things. The Feast of Unleavened Bread happens for 1 week, and then the Passover celebration is at the end of that week. I hope I got that right. So there's the instructions for the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then the escape from Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea. And then we have Israel in the desert, which the Jerusalem Bible puts as part 2 here. So yeah, there again, some of the famous stuff that you will remember from Sunday school, the manna, the quails, etc. There's there's some leaps in the narrative that are constantly causing you to go, wait, did I miss something? There's this guy named Hur, H-U-R, who is showing up in Moses' circle, but he's never introduced, or we don't know where he is. I looked him up on the internet. And the internet says, yeah, nobody knows where he came from. He just, the Bible just starts talking about him. Although I think on Wikipedia it says later, like in Deuteronomy, we find out he's the father of Caleb. Caleb, of course, being Joshua's companion. But that's from Deuteronomy, I think. And speaking of Joshua is also showing up in the book of Exodus as like Moses' sidekick. So, when Moses goes up to Sinai, Joshua is waiting at the base of Mount Sinai for him. But Joshua is also never introduced. I mean, obviously, if you've been to Sunday school, you know who Joshua is. But it's just like Moses came down from the mountain and Joshua said to him, that there seems to be some sort of ruckus at camp or something. And you're like, well, wait a second. Who is this Joshua guy? When did he get introduced in the text? In fact, I don't think they ever set up that Joshua was waiting at the base of Sinai for Moses. It's not until Moses came back down that he met up with Joshua. So these kind of things, it's bringing back memories, because it's been like 30 years since I sat down and read the Bible, attempted to read the Bible cover to cover. I had forgotten in some ways what a unsatisfying reading experience it can be, or what some of the frustrations are, or what some of the strangeness is about the Old Testament narrative. Speaking of which, we get the battle against the Amalekites in Exodus 17. And like a lot of the Old Testament narrative, the narrative is sparse here. Let me just read this here. The Amalekites came and attacked Israel at Rephidim. Why? Nobody knows. Moses said to Joshua, pick out men for yourself, and tomorrow morning march out to engage Amalek. Amalek was mentioned in the Genesis, in the book of Genesis, part of the chronologies, descendant of Esau and the ancestor of the Amalekites. This is maybe the famous story you're familiar with, where they're fighting against the Amalekites, and they need to win the battle, so they have to keep the sun in the sky. Was that it? Oh, no. Sorry. Different one. I'm getting my Bible stories mixed up. The Israelites will win as long as Moses keeps his hands up. But when Moses puts his hands down, then the Israelites are going to lose. So Moses keeps his hands up, and then as he gets tired, Aaron and Hur, there's that Hur guy again, have to hold up Moses' hands. Now, the funny thing about the Amalekites, this is yet, the Amalekites are yet another people where God says, okay, you need to kill all the Amalekites. And I remember these stories from my Christian school growing up and from Sunday school growing up vaguely, but it never made that much of an impression on me, because there are lots of passages in the Old Testament, particularly in the Conquest of Canaan sections, where God says, okay, go in and kill them all. There are a lot of genocides in the Old Testament. But when I was in my 20s and 30s, and when I was, on the internet a lot, I started noticing that the atheists and skeptics were talking about the Amalekites a lot as one of the atrocities in the Old Testament, or one of the reasons that the Old Testament did not have good moral values. This is one of the things that atheists love to talk about. And I was like, well, okay, but why are we focusing on the Amalekites? And I think, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think the reason that the Amalekites are unique is God says, wipe them all out, kill every last one of them. And I think that's different than the conquest of Canaan. Because in the conquest of Canaan, they have to purge the land, right? So if there's any Hittites or Jebusites living in the land of Canaan, they have to be completely exterminated. But if they're outside of the land of Canaan, then you don't have to hunt them down and exterminate every last one of them wherever they go type deal. We just need them out of the land of Canaan. With the Amalekites, there's something that's going to develop later in the Old Testament, where they all have to be killed down to the last one of them, whether they're inside the land of Canaan or whether they're outside. I think that's the distinction. Somebody let me know in the comments if I'm getting that wrong. Now, this is going to come up later in the Old Testament. I think the command to kill all the Amalekites is going to come up in Deuteronomy. Then Saul is going to be instructed to kill all the Amalekites in 1 Samuel. And then King Hezekiah is going to do a campaign against the Amalekites later in 2 Kings or something. And then Haman in the book of Esther is going to be described as a descendant of the Amalekites. So it's going to be continuing all the way through. But so maybe to a certain extent, I'm talking about this too early. Maybe I should save my discussion of this for when I get to those later passages. But it's a bizarre little thing because you think about, think about your Sunday school days. Who were the enemies of Israel, right? The Philistines, or the Moabites, or the Assyrians, or the Syrians, or the Babylonians, right? So why is it the Amalekites who get this special treatment, right? The Babylonians caused much more grief to the nation of Israel than the Amalekites did, right? The other bizarre thing is, if you look this up on Wikipedia or something like that, scholars aren't even really sure that the Amalekites actually existed. I guess we don't have any archaeological evidence for them or any other sources. So it's this. Perhaps this is just all made up, all mythology. And if so, what a weird thing to put in here. So this is where it all begins. Actually, sorry. Just looking at this now, it is there at the end of this passage. After they defeated the Amalekites, then Yahweh said to Moses, "Write this down in a book to keep memory of it, and say in Joshua's hearing that I shall wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." Moses then built an altar and named it Yahweh Nissi, because he said, "Lay hold of the banner of Yahweh. Yahweh is at war with Yahweh is at war with Amalek from age to age." So, I take that back. The command to exterminate the Amalekites is in here, but you can see what a short little passage this is, huh? Okay, then we get to the covenant of Mount Sinai, and this is where we start getting into the laws. So there is the 10 Commandments here in Exodus 20, what the Jerusalem Bible calls the Decalogue. Now, they give a little footnote here. They said, this is the priestly version of the 10 Commandments. There's another version, which is the Deuteronomic version, which is found in Deuteronomy 5. And they said it's the second version that has been adopted by the church. So I guess if you go to church and they read out the 10 Commandments, I guess they're reading the version from Deuteronomy 5, not the version from Exodus 20. Which is odd, isn't it? Because Exodus is where we get the image of Moses holding up the tablet with the 10 Commandments. But I guess the version that gets read out in church is apparently Deuteronomy 5. I've heard some atheists like Christopher Hitchens, etc., making a big deal about the fact that there are two versions of the 10 Commandments. But I went and I compared them, flipped ahead to Deuteronomy 5 and read that. And I think, I don't know, maybe I missed something. I think they are pretty much the same. Different words, but I think it's basically the same commandments. So, I don't know, maybe that's not such a big deal. Except, if you take a conservative Christian view on this, then the 10 Commandments are straight out of the mouth of God. So then maybe the fact that the different wordings are there is an issue. I don't know. And then we get into the law. So from this point on, we're going to be just listing out laws. Something to keep in mind when you're talking about the books of Exodus. Everyone remembers the 10 plagues, the parting of the sea, but if you want to read through it, you're going to have to get into the laws. Now, it starts out actually, maybe tastes may vary on this, but I thought this was pretty interesting, reading about the ancient Israelites' laws. Because you read through it, and there are some things in here where you think, well, that is pretty reasonable. So, for example, there's one there that if there's an ox, and the ox owned by one person gores and kills another ox, which is owned by the second person, then they have to kill the ox that had gored the first one, and then they sell the meat and split the money, or something like that. One ox kills another one. They're owned by two different people. They take the live ox and split the money. So each person walks away with half the money. But if that same ox was in the habit of goring other oxes, and this was well known, and the owner of the ox didn't take any precautions, then the ox that gets gored, the person who lost the ox gets all the money from that. And the owner of the ox that gored him gets nothing. That gored the other ox. And so you read that and you think, yeah, that's reasonable. You know, you knew your ox was a danger. You didn't lock it up. That sounds like a fair and reasonable law to me. But this is also mixed in with a lot of stuff which has not aged very well. Like the laws, some of the laws concerning slaves, where, well, I don't know. I mean, Christine Hayes, in her lectures on the Old Testament, makes the point that the laws concerning slaves in the Old Testament were not nearly as harsh as the laws concerning slaves in America in the modern era. Modern era meaning anything after the French Revolution in historical terms. So, just like 200 years ago in America, there were slaves who were under, at least the slaves in the Old Testament had some laws protecting them, whereas and could gain their freedom and stuff like that. So it looks benevolent compared with what was going on in American history. But nonetheless, so for example, there's a slave has to be freed after a certain amount of years. Say, oh, okay, well, that's good. That's better than America. But if they get married to another slave and they want to keep their wife and children, then they have to renounce their freedom and agree to be a slave forever, and then they get their ear pierced or something like that. I don't remember. So if the slave declares, "I love my master and my wife and children, I renounce his freedom," then his master shall take him to God, leading him to the door or doorpost. His master shall pierce his ear with an awl, A-W-L, awl, and he shall be in his service for all time. The contemporary English version translates this as he shall be a slave for the rest of his life. And you think, well, that's a little harsh. Just because he didn't want to give up his children, he has to be a slave for the rest of his life. Sorry, I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but the broader point being, these are kind of interesting to read. You read something, you say, okay, that's reasonable. You read something else, you say, oh, okay, that's not reasonable. And of course, if this was Hammurabi's code or something like that, it would be of much more limited interest. But because this is one of the sacred books that has formed Western civilization, and for many of us was we were taught to revere this book as children. Looking at it and picking apart the parts, it is more interesting. And maybe I'll get more onto that in a moment. Okay. Then we get into the priestly material. So this is where my interest in the book plummeted, and where I had a much harder time reading it. So we get instructions for how to build the Ark of the Covenant, how to build the tabernacle, how to build the table for the offertory bread, how to build the lampstand, the tabernacle and its hangings, the framework. And just reading about the construction of these materials caused my eyes to glaze over. I just did not have any interest in it. And I also had a really hard time visualizing what was going on. Now, this was partly because my mind kept wandering as I'm reading through these really boring descriptions, but also just because I had a hard time visualizing it. And I'd be interested in other people's experience of this, because I think maybe I just have a hard time visualizing stuff. I mean, as I'm reading through The Lord of the Rings, which I'm currently also reading, I've been complaining a lot about how I can't really visualize Tolkien's descriptions of landscapes. Maybe this is just a personal weakness. I can't visualize descriptions of stuff when I'm reading. But let me just read out part of this here. So this is part of the description of the framework of the tabernacle. You are to make frames of acacia wood for the tabernacle, these to stand upright. Each frame is to be 10 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Each frame must be fitted with twin tenons. I don't know what a tenon is, T-E-N-O-N. For all the frames of the tabernacle, you must do this. You are to make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the southern side, facing the south country. You are to make 40 silver sockets for putting under the 20 frames, thus 2 sockets under the first frame to receive its 2 tenons, and so on for the other frames. The other side of the tabernacle on the north is to have 20 frames supported by 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under each frame. For the back of the tabernacle on the west, you must make 6 frames. You are to make 2 frames for the corners at the back of the tabernacle. These frames must be coupled at their lower end, and so to the top up to the level of the first ring. This for the 2 frames that are to form the 2 corners. Thus, there will be 8 frames with their 16 silver sockets, 2 sockets under the first frame, and so on. You are to make crossbars of acacia wood, 5 to hold together the frames for one side of the tabernacle, 5 to hold the frames for the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 to hold the frames that form the west end of the tabernacle. The middle bar, fixed halfway up, is to run from one end to the other. The frames are to be plated with gold and with gold rings on them to make crossbars, which you are to plate with gold. That is how you are to erect the tabernacle according to the model shown to you on the mountain. So that was this part here I just read out. Now, I get to the end of that and I think to myself, I cannot visualize that at all. And furthermore, I stopped paying attention halfway through and my mind was wandering. And because I'm a certain type of reader, some of you will identify with this, I said, right, back to the top of that section, read it again, and this time concentrate. And then I get to the bottom and same thing. I'm like, oh, okay, come on, Joel, concentrate. Visualize this tabernacle. You can do it. Back again, try and read it. So I found it a frustrating reading experience. Now, obviously, some of that was on me, getting frustrated whenever I caught myself not absorbing every single detail. That's not out of any religious instinct. That's just the type of reader I am. I was thinking to myself, you know what I could really use is an illustrated Bible. I was thinking, you know how they have those landmark series of classic books like Landmark Herodotus and Landmark Thucydides, where they have illustrations in throughout the book. I thought we could really use a landmark Bible where, as we're reading through these descriptions, there's illustrations of what this is supposed to look like. So here is what all the frames look like. Here is what the south side of the tabernacle looks like. And then I thought to myself, the internet. We've got the internet. So I went to the internet. You can look up illustrations of this, and that did help me. So I looked up illustrations of the tabernacle. I looked up illustrations of the lampstand. I could not visualize this lampstand at all. But you look it up on the internet, and it's a menorah essentially. The priestly vestments, the ephod and the pectoral of judgment. I again really had trouble with my mind wandering when I was reading those, so I looked them up. But yeah, my reading really slowed down when I got to those sections. There are descriptions of the altar, and there are also descriptions of some of the rituals, how to make the incense, how to sacrifice certain animals, how to purify yourself before going into the sanctuary. And that stuff I just found boring, to be honest. I complained about this in my weekly reading vlogs. I'll link to those down below. In retrospect, I probably complained too much. I apologize for whining. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was something that I found not interesting and boring. And there were moments when I thought to myself, why am I doing this? I already read the Bible through when I was in 7th grade. I already put myself through this. Why make myself do it again? And I had memories. I had memories of reading this stuff 30 years ago and being frustrated as a 7th grader because I had much the same personality when I was in 7th grade. Much the same personality of doing, I used to read it every night before going to bed as part of a devotional routine, and getting frustrated with not being able to focus on the descriptions of the tabernacle. And I remembered that from 30 years ago and thought, why am I making myself do this again? But really, it's not that bad. And in fact, after I finished reading the whole thing, I listened to the audiobook version of this. I listened to the audio of the contemporary English version, which is on YouTube, and the King James version, which is on YouTube. I'll link to them down below. And the whole thing, if you do it on audio, from beginning to end, is 2.5 hours. Here I spent a couple months reading this and just complaining every week about how boring these 2 pages were. But it puts it in perspective. It's only really a few hours of reading if you just sit down and do it, and if you can prevent your mind from wandering. Okay, then these lists of laws are interrupted by the golden calf incident. Again, the golden calf is something I don't think I need to recap. Everybody knows this from Sunday school. Except maybe the Zeal of the Levites. There's this rather bizarre passage here. So, Moses comes down. He's furious about the golden calf. And so when Moses saw the people so out of hand, for Aaron had allowed them to lapse into idolatry, with enemies all around them, he stood at the gate of the camp and shouted, "Who is for Yahweh? To me." And all the sons of Levi rallied to him. And he said to them, "This is the message of Yahweh, from the God of Israel. Gird on your sword, every one of you, and quarter the camp from gate to gate, killing one his brother, one his friend, another his neighbor." The sons of Levi carried out the commands of Moses, and of the people about 3,000 men perished that day. Today Moses said, "You have won yourselves an investiture as priests of Yahweh, at the cost, one of his son, another of his brother." and he grants you a blessing today. Okay, so a couple things there. First of all, the sons of Levi, presumably this is the tribe of Levites, the tribe of Levi. So if they're all the ones doing the killing, then how are they killing their sons and brothers, right? Because their sons and brothers would also be in the tribe of Levi, right? I mean, friend and neighbor, okay, I can understand those, but how are they killing their sons or brothers? The other thing, and maybe this is a cheap shot, but I'm going to throw this in here. Christopher Hitchens has a video where he's going through and talking about the Ten Commandments, and Christopher Hitchens points out the irony of this killing right after Moses just gets the Ten Commandments where it says, "Thou shalt not kill." Now, in terms of the reading experience, the "thou shalt not kill" happens in chapter 20, and the Levites going through and killing 3,000 people happens way over in chapter 32. So it is a good 12 chapters later. But that's just in terms of the page numbers or the chapter numbers. In terms of the narrative, this is right after Moses gets the Ten Commandments, right? So he's going up there, he's getting the law, and this is the very next thing that happens in the narrative is the Levites go through and kill 3,000, and Moses says, "Well done." I realize that's a cheap shot because the "thou shalt not kill" thing is contradicted all throughout the Old Testament, and I know that Christians view it as if God commands you to kill, then it doesn't count, and that's the interpretation with which you need to read through the Old Testament, but ironic nonetheless. Okay, so we have the gold calf thing. Then we get back to the furnishing and building of the sanctuary. Now, as far as I can tell, this is exactly the same descriptions as before, with the verb tense changes. So, for example, the framework of the sanctuary. This is the counterpart to the section I was just reading out before. So this is chapter 36. For the tabernacle, he made frames of acacia wood, these to stand upright. Each frame was 10 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Each frame was fitted with twin tenons. This he did for all the frames of the tabernacle. He made the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the southern side, facing the south country. He made 40 silver sockets for putting under the 20 frames. So it seems to be the same thing, only it's the verb is changed into the past tense now, because it's describing what he did. I think the order is slightly different. For example, the framework for the tabernacle is after the description of the lampstand, where when God is given the instructions, the lampstand and the table are described first, and then the framework for the tabernacle. So some of the orders are switched around there. I think it's pretty much exactly the same descriptions, but now put into the past tense. But I do have to admit, it's a little bit difficult to flip back and forth and compare. So maybe there were small differences. I looked at one section and I flipped back and compared it, and I said, okay, this looks like it's basically the same. But I didn't cut them up and put them side by side under a microscope or something like that to see if they lined up exactly. I'm sure that information is out there somewhere on the internet, whether there's any differences. But looks to be the same. So, if I hated reading through these descriptions the first time, now I've got to do it all over again. And, because I'm trying to make a thorough job at this, I really hard to concentrate and really tried hard not to let my mind wander. But I had to go through, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5 more pages. Five and a half more pages of description of the tabernacle and the altars and the stuff being built. But by the way, it's a little bit, I'm not quite sure who that he is there who's doing all this. Earlier, God did point out the craftsman for the sanctuary. There's Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur. I'm not sure if that's the same Hur who was Moses' companion. And what is he doing? He's doing the designing and working in silver and craft. And there's Olahib, son of Asamach of the tribe of Dan. And he has the gift of teaching other people. So I guess presumably it's those two guys, or maybe Bezalel, who is making the sanctuary. But there's a rather abrupt change to the he pronoun, because it says later, all the most skilled craftsmen among the workers made the tabernacle. He made it with 10 sheets of fine twinned linen. So it just, one sentence says, okay, we've got all the most skilled craftsmen. Then it changes to he. And it's just he throughout all the rest of it. So I'm like, who is he? Do I have to jump back up here to go to Bezalel, or what happened to all the most skilled craftsmen? They were just mentioned in the previous sentence. Again, this is one of the things with reading the Bible. It's not always a smooth reading experience. You do have to jump around and do this kind of stuff. The last time I read this, I was in 7th grade. It was 30 years ago. I was a Christian at that time. And I didn't really question it. I had the framing that all Christians are taught, that all these bizarre Old Testament laws are superseded by the new covenant with Jesus. So we were taught in Sunday school, yes, it's bizarre, but it's all in the past, so don't worry about it. And it was part of God's plan. For some reason, God needed all of this to happen so that the nation of Israel could be established, so that Jesus could be born into the nation of Israel. The point being, I guess, I was given the framing of none of this applies anymore. But even given that framing of none of this applies anymore, it still seems bizarre to me now, reading this as a skeptic, that God cares about what materials the tabernacle is constructed out of. I don't know, maybe some of that is I'm older now and maybe more critical, more of a critical thinker than I was in 7th grade. But I also think it just goes to show how when you approach something with a different mindset, how much things jump out at you, which would never jump out at you if you approached it with the other mindset. So when you're reading this as a believer, you're like, okay, yeah, really important to God that he gets his tabernacle just so, that this is all part of God's master plan. And when you're reading it as a skeptic, you're like, okay, this can't possibly be the real God, right? There's no way that the God of the universe cares so much about this stuff. And while I'm on that subject, things like that jumped out at me throughout the whole Bible. So the God in the version of Exodus strikes me as not the God of the universe. He strikes me as a tribal God. He's the God of Israel. He is very concerned about Israel's prestige among the nations, and he's very concerned about his own prestige among the Egyptians. And that's why these 10 plagues keep going on and why God keeps hardening Pharaoh's heart, because he wants to show the Egyptians how powerful he is. And you think to yourself as you're reading, especially if you're reading this as a skeptic, well, what do you care what the Egyptians think? The Egyptians aren't going to be around in 500 years, or they'll be around in 500 years, but they'll be under the domination of Assyria. In cosmic time, it just doesn't really seem to make sense. Not to mention that God doesn't need to mess around with these 10 plagues. If he could snap his fingers and wipe Egypt off the map. On the other hand, I don't know. It does. If you think about it too long, then you think to yourself, well, what do I know? I mean, who am I to know the mind of God? Maybe, like my own view of God is shaped by my culture and my upbringing, where I was taught to believe in a cosmic God who had cosmic concerns and was omnipotent and all-knowing and stuff like that. My criticism of the Old Testament God is based on my conception of the common conception of the Christian God that I was brought up with, if that makes any sense. So, if I had lived in a different culture in a different time, if I had lived in the ancient world, maybe this would have made perfect sense to me, right? Because the Greeks all had their own altars and rituals, and the Egyptians had, every culture had their, it seemed to have been a common cultural thing, right? Okay, I have been talking for just over an hour, and I said I was going to wrap things up when I got to an hour. I'm getting to the point where my voice is getting a little bit tired anyways. Obviously, there is so much more to talk about, so many things I didn't even touch on in here. But as I said at the beginning of the video, that's the way it's going to go. Yeah, we'll finish it up here.